And that breaking news right now, there is an active shooter situation at Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us for First Coast News at noon. I'm Jeannie Blaylock. We want to show you a map. This is just breaking. We are just beginning to get details, and they are at this point still very sketchy, but you can see the base is just north of our southeast Georgia counties, about an hour outside of Savannah. Now, according to a Facebook post by the base, the commander issued a lockdown and everyone is being told to stay indoors. Our ABC News partner in Savannah says the lockdown was put in place just over an hour and a half ago at 11 o'clock, about 11:04 to be precise. So this is the actual alert posted online by Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield. It says a lockdown due to that active shooter incident in the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team area at the Wright Army Airfield. According to our NBC affiliate in Savannah, this is not at the main Fort Stewart area. It says the lockdown started shortly after 11 a.m. Law enforcement on the scene. ABC is reporting that there are casualties. They're being sent by some reports to a place called Memorial Hospital there around the Savannah area. We are learning right now more about the situation. We'll keep you updated. Right now, though, we do want to talk to our military expert. That's retired Vice Admiral from the Navy, and that would be Rick Snyder. And Rick, can you hear me now on the phone?
I do, thank you.
Okay, so I'm seeing so many questions about this right now. Tell us what you've learned since we've talked about 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, well, I think the big news is it appears that that the shooter or shooters are still at large, which of course is a big concern. They've got to find them and isolate that threat. And I'm also seeing that there are confirmed casualties, which is of course is a tragedy.
Well, I saw that too, that there may be more than one shooter. What is making people say that?
I think it's safe to presume that there would be more than one. That would be a worst case scenario, and you always want to respond as though it's a worst case scenario.
And I'm also hearing questions from people who know the space. They want to know some more details. So let me read you what our NBC station is saying. They're saying that this brigade training area is off of Highway 144 near Sunbury Road. You're seeing a live picture right now at one of the gates apparently at Fort Stewart, but they say this brigade is not located in, quote, the main Fort Stewart area. What could that mean? I don't know that area well.
Yeah, so they would put, as I mentioned earlier, they've got aviation units that are part of the 3rd Infantry Division and these brigade combat teams, and typically they would locate those aviation units away from and close to an airfield in order to, of course, do their flying. So, as we mentioned, they did isolate this area in particular, and so it is a very large base, and although everyone has been told to shelter, it does look like they've focused on this one particular area.
And that area, what goes on at that area? What sort of training is that for the Army, the brigade training?
Some of it is, I'll call it, classroom training in the administrative facilities. But then, of course, it would depend on what they're doing. The infantry would have firearms training, shooting training. Same with the artillery. Aviators would be conducting flight operations or flight simulators to stay proficient in the aircraft.
And so let me read to you, and you can tell me what you garner from this, being the expert. This is actually from the military Fort Stewart Facebook page. The commander has issued a lockdown in the 2ABCT area in place order for Fort Stewart, including Wright and Evans Army Airfield. Lock down your facility immediately. Stay inside, close and lock all windows and doors. Keep telephone lines open and report accountability to your leadership, and continue to monitor social media outlets. What do you gain from that information?
Yeah, so one pretty specific location. Those airfields would be some of the fields that those aviation units would train with. The other thing is accountability. So that's the muster your people. We need to find out we need to account for everyone, both to identify potential casualties and maybe to identify the potential shooter if they don't muster with their units. And then, of course, the lockdown piece is very important.
And for the layman, muster with their units means?
Take attendance, if you will.
Okay. And now I'm also seeing questions. I want to clear this up. I don't know if this is a myth or if it's not, but it's saying that military personnel on bases are not allowed to carry, but you have to be an MP on base to carry, military police to carry a weapon. Is that true or is that false?
Yeah, on a day-to-day basis, that's true. The majority of the soldiers would not be armed on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis, unless, of course, they were going to do marksmanship training. They would then check out or draw weapons, proceed to the training facility, conduct the training, come back and check those weapons in. But it is, on a day-to-day basis, it is just the military police folks that are armed.
How does that affect an active shooter hunt down like this?
Well, obviously it limits the number of people that could respond with force, but that's a good thing. Army soldiers aren't trained to respond to an active shooter, whereas the military police are. So the idea here is you put the weapons in the hands of those folks best trained to respond to the circumstance.
I know there's been a big push among military members for mental health training. We don't have any idea what this is all about, but you might think that the mental health could be a factor possibly. That's reasonable to ask about. And so what has the Army done in recent times to try to combat that ongoing dangerous situation?
Well, throughout the early 2000s with combat in Afghanistan and Iraq, we realized that a lot of military folks suffer trauma and difficulty responding to that, what's known as post-traumatic stress disorder. And so since then, as we've become aware of that problem and the magnitude of it, a great focus across all the services of removing the stigma, if you will, of coming forward if you feel that you may have some mental illness. And so come forward if you need help, a recognition by other service members to watch out for your fellow service members to identify any signs of stress, and then a tremendous increase in psychological resources to be able to respond to these challenges.
Now, if you're wondering what you're looking at live on our screen right now, I don't know, Rick, if you can see the TV or not, but I'm having a hard time reading what that says because it's behind a tree, but it looks like it says Woldridge or something, perhaps a gate. And I'm trying to figure out if cars are going in and out of that gate or what might be going on, but on a lockdown, a Woldridge gate. So I see cars going, I guess, through it. Can you explain what that might be going on with a lockdown? Why are we seeing vehicular traffic?
Yeah, so you would have, of course, security forces being able to move, and then if they were able to isolate a particular area of the base, this may be in another area that has not gone on lockdown.
And I know you work a lot with national defense. Have there been any terrorist threats that have been a concern as far as military bases in Georgia?
No, nothing. Certainly nothing specific. We did several weeks ago have the concern on retired senior people here in Florida. I don't think this is all related to that. But as I've said before, terrorist threats are always something we need to be cognizant of. The fact that this happened on a military base, as we discussed earlier, means that someone had to have access. So, an outside terrorist organization I would see as less likely in this case.
So we've also learned that there are schools nearby on lockdown. I've read that at least 2 elementary schools and a middle school are in lockdown. That's in Liberty County. So those schools would be off base though, right? Or would there be any schools super close to that base?
It's possible they could be on base. They do have family housing on there, and I'm not familiar where their schools are, but there are some community public schools that on very large bases are actually located on the base. But I don't know specifically here with Fort Stewart.
And we know Fort Stewart is large, 10,000 civilians, military personnel, staff. Can you give us a scope of just how big? I mean, my entire life I've heard about Fort Stewart, Georgia, and the Army base there. How big a place is this?
Well, and even this may be hard to comprehend, but it's 280,000 acres.
And that is quite enormous there. Okay, we have an update now from, I'll just read this to you, from Fort Stewart, Georgia. And this is from one of our producers who's following this very closely, from Fort Stewart Hunter Army Airfield. So an official statement. 5 soldiers were shot today in an active shooter situation. This is new information to us, into our newsroom now. This incident in the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team area. All soldiers were treated on site and moved to Wynn Army Community Hospital for further treatment. There is no active threat in the community, I guess outside the base. Law enforcement were dispatched for a possible shooting in the 2nd ABCT complex at 10:56 a.m. The shooter was apprehended at 11:35 a.m. So I don't know if they're saying that there's not another shooter, and we know for sure that that is over. What do you read into that statement there as we see an ambulance live on the screen there near Hunter Army Airfield?
Well, that would certainly be a a good thing if they've apprehended the shooter and confirmed that there aren't any other shooters. Hunter Army Airfield is about 30 miles east of Fort Stewart, and so I'm sure they're just trying to reassure the folks over there and keep them informed on what's going on.
And I can offer a little bit more detail from the same post I'm reading. The installation was locked down at 11:04 a.m. We knew that, and Fort Stewart lifted the lockdown of the main containment area at 12:10 p.m. But the second ABCT complex is still locked down. What does that mean in your mind?
Yeah, so that sounds like they're sort of separating the difference between Fort Stewart and Hunter Army Airfield, which is dislocated from Fort Stewart itself.
And it also says that emergency medical personnel were dispatched to treat the wounded soldiers at 11:09 a.m. The incident still under investigation. No additional information released at this time. But this is news that we didn't have before. Unfortunately, 5 soldiers, according to this post from the airfield, were shot today in an active shooter incident. We don't know their condition. We don't know if these were, what the extent of the injuries are. And for just the layman, when the military says casualties, can you please define that?
Yeah, a casualty is someone who is injured or killed.
And so that's why we don't know their status right now. But we did see a moment ago an ambulance with perhaps some person who was shot or injured on the base right there. And why would they be taking them to, well, it says Wynn Army Community Hospital. Is that going to be outside the base, or they would have their own medical facility? They're on such a large base.
No, they would have their own medical facilities on the base.
Okay. So if you could summarize in your mind what I just read to the people, it sounds like part of the lockdown's lifted, but some of it is still being locked down. So we're not sure if the active shooter situation is over, or are we not?
Yeah, at this point, I would say, although they're reporting that they apprehended a suspect, I think we ought to still wait and see if there are more, and get some confirmation that the threat is over. The lockdown piece, I think, of course, as soon as this happened, there's going to be a very broad and aggressive response, and then as the events unfold, they'll start to back off of that.
And one sentence that's important for anybody who lives in this area or knows somebody around the base, let me just repeat that again. There is no active threat to the community. Of course, that's different than the base.
That's correct. And of course, a lockdown means you don't come in or out. So if there's still a threat on the base, it would most likely remain confined to the base. Okay.
Retired Admiral Rick Snyder, we appreciate your expertise as our military advisor. And if you have other things to say, which I'm sure you will, we will get back to you just as quickly as you have more information. We'll let you go so you can talk with your sources. Thank you so much, Admiral.